Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. So it just came to my attention that just here in a couple of days will be 3 weeks since the fire started. And that was kind of shocking to me when I realized that it was actually that long ago. Because in some ways it seems like it was just yesterday. And it does seem like it's past, it's a past memory, but I was kind of surprised it was that 3 weeks. And when I think it was the very first morning reflection that Ajahn Pasanno gave when we returned, it was I think it was titled something like back to normal but not too normal. And he kind of gave some encouragement to let this the whole event and how it affected us, our emotions, or our thoughts, or worries, to really let it sink in. And I think during the time of the evacuation, being displaced, and for the people who still are displaced, it definitely brings up a lot of wholesome Dhamma reflections. You don't have to even try very hard to be contemplating Dhamma or seeing Dhamma, because it's just it always is everywhere. But what Lumpur was pointing out is that it in times like that, it's just it kind of pushes us out of our habitual patterns or things that we just kind of floating through life in a kind of autopilot. And so situations like this can give us a great opportunity to practice. In one way, just even see how well we have been practicing, how we then respond to the current situation. And I think with these past several weeks, for myself, there's a real strong sense that the events of the fire are probably going to be a significant sort of memory for me, or a significant aspect of my life. It's like it's good not to create a self around it, or to make your identity be around any event. But I was reflecting that in my life, there's been several really key things, and I'm sure it's probably the same for everybody. We can look back, and there's definitely turning points or some very significant events that have happened in our lives, and I won't go into them. I think I've talked about them before, probably recorded, but for me, when I was in high school, there was a high school shooting that I was in the classroom when it happened, and it made a huge impact in my life, in the sense that I remember at the time I kind of was extremely, I was a very good student, and kind of almost failed out of, it was my high school, it was my senior year in high school, and just lost all interest in just about everything. And I remember the shooting was around two guys kind of fighting about a girl, and I don't know if that had anything to do with it, but it was basically at that exact same time as when sort of my desire, or thoughts of even wanting to be in marriage or be in relationship, kind of died. And remember, I dated for a couple more years after that, kind of feeling that was expected culturally, and it always felt wrong, like I was violating something in myself by doing that. And so basically for the last 31 years now, counting it up, that I've not necessarily had a monastic lifestyle, but basically been celibate, and I can definitely trace it back to that event. And then there's a few years after that, after I graduated from college, had a near-death experience of altitude sickness, hiking in the Himalayas, and that was kind of my spiritual kind of awakening. Really, this quest for monastic life. I can trace it back to that one event, and it was interesting that in both of those instances, because it was very traumatic, and both of those events, and the way I dealt with them was I kept a journal and did a lot of writing about them, just sort of processing it. And it wasn't until about halfway through our time at the City of 10,000 Buddhas, I kind of realized I was doing the exact same thing at the City of 10,000 Buddhas. Like almost every kind of minute that we weren't doing something, I was calling it the unofficial news, Jotipalo's unofficial news, and I was only sending it to people who had contacted me, because I didn't want to kind of be scaring people or giving people too much information. But it started off with I just wrote just a very quick summary of the first couple of days to Ajahn Amaro, and as I was just about ready to hit the send button, I got an inquiry from, I think it was Ajahn Menindo, and so I looked at what I'd written to make sure it was kind of appropriate to send to him as well, and send it to him, and then just started getting some really encouragement, positive feedback from them about getting that news, and it was kind of reassuring. So then, just as people were contacting us, or Ajahn Pasanno would say people were contacting, then I kept including them on the list. So it was getting, I think it was about 20 to 30 people kind of at the end that I was sending stuff out to. But I could tell it was actually something that was really helpful for me, just sort of processing it and putting the whole thing into some kind of order. It was having some structure. And so I do have some ideas of what how these events may shape my life. But the day that Ajahn Pasanno was giving the talk at the City of 10,000 Buddhas, and we were walking over together, and I made the comment to him. I said, here less than a month I'll be leaving to go up to the Pacific Hermitage and spending the winter up there, and then doing a little bit of traveling in the spring. That's the plan, and then come back just for maybe a month for the temple opening, if everything falls together, and that happens. That'll probably be in the month of June next year. Then after that, I'm planning to be away for a while. Kind of no definite time frame, but spending some time exploring monastic life in a different way. And I was talking to Ajahn Pasanno, and I said, these events have really pulled the Sangha together in so many ways, just seeing everybody's strengths and the positive sides of everybody, just even just coming together and getting through this. And I told Ajahn Pasanno, I said, it's really kind of funny, because I was planning to leave, and I've left in the past, like after we've been a monk for 5 years, we have a lot more freedom and kind of choice of where we want to live. And I think after my 5th Vasa, I asked to go live someplace, because I was not really happy living here, and And I can see now that was all my own fault, but just left with in a bad way. I mean, I left in a good way of getting permission and doing things, but it's like my reason for leaving wasn't so good. And but I told Ajahn Pasanno, I said, I really feel like I'm really quite happy with being in community and feel positive about this community. So it's like I'm not not wanting to go for bad reasons or wrong reasons. And said, but these events have kind of maybe I don't want. I really feel like I don't want to go. I looked at him and said, but I'm going to anyway. And he goes, that's the right attitude. That's really that's a good way of looking at it or thinking of it, because you will always have the positive memories, the positive experiences of being here, and that will be, he referred to it as the Sangha gem, the Sangha jewel, that you'll be taking that with you. And so, it's a. If I had to sum up what I think this this last period of time has meant for me, is just that Sangha. And one of the monks, senior monk friend of mine, wrote and said, wow, can't imagine what it would be like to lose Abhayagiri, or to lose 20 years of work. And I was like, yeah, that's true. That would be really sad if all the donations that came in and all the hard work was lost. But I wrote to him, I said, but I really feel really strongly that it's like we were building more than buildings. We were building more than bridges, more than the roads out into the forest. It's like we've been building Sangha. We've been building community. And and a fire can't take that away. Like even if all the buildings had been destroyed, it would have been even more emotional and probably more shocking to us. But who knows what would have happened? I'm glad we're not facing that decision issue right now. But even what we did experience, we can feel it even, the strength of the Sangha. I don't mean just the resident community that live here, the monks, the novices, Angarkas, the lay people that are here. It's the wider community as well. And there's also been this real strong, connection with the City 10,000 Buddhas that I think was really a really nice connection that we have with them, or sort of reinvigorated with them. I know Lumpur Sumedho and Ajahn Amaro in particular had a really strong connection with the city, Master Wah, and half of our property was given to us by Master Wah. And so I think in the early days there's much more of a sense of our connection with them, and just over time, it's not that nothing was wrong with our relationship, and I think several of us have 5 or 6 or at least 4 of us have gone over and have been witnesses at ordinations. So part of their ordination ceremonies recently, and we do go over occasionally for some of their events, and haven't had anybody over for a while, but sometimes during our bhikkhu ordinations we've invited their communities over, and we do things like their school comes over, the boys' school definitely comes over at least once a year, and so there's some interactions. But this was like the first time, definitely the first time, as the entire community was living there and plugging into their puja schedule and the meal offering, and then while we were there, several of the monks were able to talk to the university, give talks at the boys and girls school, and And so, yeah, it was there's could be a whole Dhamma talk there, just talking about just the respect we have for the way they practice, and then Jin Chuan was one of the monks there who was looking after us daily, sort of in our meetings and talking to us and helping out with any of our needs. And he was likewise, similarly, really impressed with the way our Sangha held together and how we managed things. And he said, it was kind of inspiring him to, looking at his future, like living at the city 10,000 Buddhas, and with his ordination, like, there's definitely positives and ways that they practice that are that we could learn from, but they were realizing the same thing about us, and so it was a beautiful, unexpected sort of cross-pollination of sanghas that kind of happened again. One comment there, one thought I've had about when we were there, just kind of almost as a side note, but just seeing the way that they practice differently, and from the way we do, it's like here it's all a very strong seniority, and Ajahn Pasanno is a really very strong leader, and like when we go to the food line, Ajahn Pasanno is the first one to go, and whenever we walk someplace, he's the leader, and we're all kind of following him, and so I was kind of get this image of like he's like a bulldozer that sort of pushing out all the defilements and showing us the way and giving us the teachings, and he's this strong leader leading the way. And but at the city 10,000 Buddhas, Dharma Master Hung Lu, he's the abbot, and also a very extremely good practitioner, I've heard. I was there for a monastic conference, and I think he was only getting like 2 hours of sleep, and like they did a group photo, and then he stayed up all night long, sort of printing the photographs and laminating them and getting just doing all this sort of administrative type work, and we were all kind of amazed that he had done this overnight, and someone made a comment, and he was, he said it, or probably one of the other monks said, well, he only sleeps 2 or 3 hours a night anyway, so it wasn't for him wasn't that big of an effort, but I found it really kind of reassuring or almost nurturing, the fact that whenever they did anything, like let's say when we do something and Ajahn Pasanno is leading the way, he was always the last person in the line. It's like when we would just even doing recitations and doing the circumambulating the inside the Dhamma hall, he was the last one walking, or when we walked over to the dining hall or walking back from the dining hall, he was always the last one. And just got this real sense of this nurturing that it's almost like the Mahayana school, the Bodhisattva vow of making sure everybody gets enlightened, gets across, and a very visual symbol of that, of the abbot is the last one, and he's making sure everybody gets there. And I found that very nurturing, very helpful. And say one thing I was thinking of doing for this evening, kind of talking, is we do have quite a few stories on the internet, on our news section about the fires, and I was just kind of realizing the other day, or paying attention, and like Ajahn Pasanno was giving a talk, and Ajahn Dhamma was giving a talk, and formal talks, and we keep referring to the fire, but people haven't read the stories. Thought about just talking about it just a little bit. Actually, that particular night, a lot of people, even if you did read the stories, I don't know I haven't read them myself. Tanjagaro did he took my notes that I was the unofficial news and was editing it and putting something presentable on the news, the website. And it just, I don't know if I'll go into, we'll just see what comes out. I haven't planned anything. But there's just, in the 3-week unfolding of this, there's just been continual, Dhamma reflections for me. I probably won't get into actually the day of the evacuation. Maybe I'll just start talking about more about my impressions of actually life since we've been kind of back here. And and there's just so many reflections have come up in conversations and people that I've met. It's even hard to say like, where should you even start. But just huge appreciation to the firefighters that are on our property and very actively saving the forest. I guess it was about 2 months before the fire started. I started the practice of just daily walking the loop trail, and I think for myself it was just really connecting back to the land again. I've had some knee problems and some health issues for about 10 years. I don't think I'd maybe only once a year kind of walk the loop trail, and so I was walking it just every day, at least once, if not twice a day, and just really falling in love with the land again. And it was funny when we were at the City of 10,000 Buddhas. The USA Today newspaper came and they interviewed me, and I forget how it came up, but I said something to the fact of as a Buddhist, or as a Buddhist monk, we've practiced trying not to be attached to things, and then I said, just blurted out, but I am totally attached to the land at Abhayagiri. Kind of laughed, but I was reflecting on that later, and I was telling somebody that when I was looking at a place to ordain, I was pretty sure I wanted to do it in the United States for various reasons, and so I visited. I didn't visit Bhavana Society, but I visited Ajahn Jeff and Ajahn Punadamo in Thunder Bay, Ontario, and here. And I remember at the end of my kind of going around and looking at all these monasteries and living there for a period of time, I kind of felt like all of them had advantages or disadvantages, but they weren't equal, but all three of them would have been suitable places to practice. A lot of respect for Ajahn Jeff, and but had similar equal respect for Ajahn Pasanno and Ajahn Amaro. And it's funny, it's like one of the tipping points for why I chose to ordain with Ajahn Pasanno was this land. And I knew that at the time too. It was like there was something about the physical property that really drew me here. And I'd kind of forgotten that. It wasn't until the fire came through, and I think the hardest part for me was during that week that we were away was that just not having any news. The only thing we were finding that could give us any sense of what was happening was these satellite maps that showed the heat, and of course we were being continually told that they're not accurate. You don't know. It's only people on the ground, and we were telling ourselves that because the fire map kept getting closer and closer and closer to the center of the monastery and where the buildings were, and it was frighteningly accurate how accurate those maps were when we finally came in and got a chance to walk around. They weren't 100% accurate, but they were much closer than what I was hoping. And so, I remember when the first day we came back, I think one of the jokes I had was in my own mind anyway was that we're no longer the forest monks, but we're the cleaning monks of Abhayagiri. So it was like everywhere we went, it was like it's what we do anyway as monastics, is put a lot of effort into maintenance and keeping things clean and orderly. And so the very first day we were back, I think we had the meal at the City of 10,000 Buddhas, and we came over as a procession and stopped at Sandra's house on the way in, and then came here. And then a bunch of people, we kind of broke up into some chores, and so several people went up to the mub to clean. A lot of people stayed down here and were cleaning, and several people went off to check on the water situation, see if it was safe to be drinking the water and if we had any. And myself and one other person, we went and walked the loop trail just to see what kind of damage we were looking at. And so it was interesting to me. Like, the very first thing, really strong impulse was to go walk the loop trail when I first got here, to assess what needed to be happen. And even the day before that, several of us that came in to see if it was safe to actually bring the community back, and it wasn't here, but I think 30 seconds. And I asked Ajahn Pasanno if I could run up to the Black Rock cabins to see if I could get a view of the property. And so then this week I've had a couple of opportunities just to go into Ukiah for various dental or physical therapy sessions. And then the first day I went into the dentist, and it was just checking in with the secretary, the receptionist. She was just asking, how we did, and I told her we fared fairly well, and then I said, well, how about you? Or people in the office, and it's a very small, dentistry place, but I think someone in their office, I think it was a parent of one of the lost their house. And then from there we went to Carpet One to get some information, and the first thing they did when we walked in is, how'd you do in the fire? And we told them, and I said, well, how did you do? And they're like, well, one of their employees lost their house. And then we went over to Freeman's to grab something, and the first thing the clerk asked was, how'd your property do? How'd you fare? And told her, and then asked her, well, how did you do? She said, I was fine, but 3 people that work here in the store lost their house. And it was really hard not to start crying, just because, every single person, every single place that we went into, was deeply affected by the fire. And I think the highlight for me, besides sort of seeing the connection to the Sangha and seeing the community pulling together, was we were Cal Fire. We're here for basically the first week that we were here, still doing projects. And even this afternoon after the meal, I went and walked the loop trail, and there's still a fire on the hillside, and I was noticing this big plume of smoke sort of coming out of one of the trees. And they said that'll probably happen for 3 or 4 weeks until it really starts raining, and so the tree roots are still burning, and you can still smell the smoke in the monastery. And but just the interactions I've had with the firefighters, and there's been correctional facilities. When Cal Fire were here, had a lot of the inmates can be on these fire. They were actually some of them that were here in the first. I get this great photo Ajahn with a couple of the firefighters, and we had to take it down off the website though, because we didn't think about it, but you have to get permission, and they don't want any pictures with faces of the inmates on it, so we had to take it down. But just not only the inmates, but all the different crews that we met were just most of them all of them were just like really fascinated by what we were doing here, and asking questions, and just being, especially the professional firefighting crews that came in first. They were almost all totally grateful for the loop trail, because it made their life a lot easier, because they were able to rush out into the back of the monastery carrying extremely heavy packs and gear and things, and so they had this really well-maintained trail that they could get out there to fight the fire. So in the back of my mind, I'm always kind of wondering if that probably could have prevented the entire monastery from burning, because they were able to get out and fight the fire in the very back quite quickly. And when we were at the City of 10,000 Buddhas one night, or one afternoon, Ajahn Pasanno went to a meeting with the fire marshal, and they were advising the City of 10,000 Buddhas what to do if they needed to evacuate there. And so that first week was pretty emotional, because so we got into the City of 10,000 Buddhas, and the wind was predicted to shift to be blowing more towards Ukiah. And so there was talk of, well, what happens if that fire jumps Highway 20? It's like, do we need to evacuate here? And I still have it, but we had I thought the beautiful things about our community was there was just every morning, even though we're kind of in this tragedy, it's we still did morning puja, we still had our work meeting, we still plugged into a schedule, and I could really see the value of that, and just having some sort of assurance and everybody on the same page. But I remember a lot of these meetings were okay, we have this number of cars, and there's this number of people, and assigning people to cars. And so we came up with an evacuation list of what we were going to do if we needed to leave the City of 10,000 Buddhas. But Ajahn Pasanno was at a meeting with the fire marshal, and they actually advised us that if you're going to be in a fire, the City of 10,000 Buddhas is the best place to be, because it really was quite well defensed for fire. And but one of the fire chiefs had advised Ajahn Pasanno that we reach out to the various sort of fire departments and people, and he mentioned that just one of the Redwood Valley firefighters lost his house, and but yet he was still out there fighting the fires, and just mentioned to us that these firefighters, these first responders, they see just really horrific things, and don't always have the good of resources to deal with it emotionally, and so he really encouraged us to kind of reach out to them. And there was one of the Cal Fire fighters who was here, and I just felt like he was just a really good guy, and he was asking me lots of questions and things. So we came down, and I asked him, I told him that story, that the fire chief had said that, and I asked if he had any suggestions about that. And he said, well, he works for Cal Fire, and it's a very well-funded organization, and he said, we do get counseling, we do have ways of getting support. And he said actually the previous day they had actually had all the chiefs had gotten together and had just a day-long meeting, and they called in people from outside to do the duties, and they were able to sit down and process emotionally what had happened, and also talk about probably logistics and how they can do things better. But then he said, it's the volunteer fire departments that don't get that much resource. So he gave us some suggestions for where to go to and who to reach out to. And then but then I asked him. I said, well, for you personally, I think, how do you deal with the stress of what you see? And it was funny because he said, well, there's a certain type of personality that gets into sort of being a first responder, and he said, so most of what I see doesn't really affect me. And that was his first statement. And then he said, it's only the kids stuff that bothers me. And then he started to go on. And I was like, wait. What do you mean kids stuff? And I was thinking he was going to mean like, drunk drivers or, drug overdoses or something like that. And he said no. He said it's and he started telling me all these stories about like the young children that he'd had to save or couldn't save. And then he started telling me stories about teenagers, stories of pulling people out of wreckage and stuff. And then he started telling me stories about adults. So it started off as it's just the kid stuff, but and here he's a firefighter that gets the resources, gets actually the training and support, and I think it shocked him actually what things he was starting to tell me, because it's like it was just under the surface and he hadn't really processed it. And so there's just so many stories just in this last 3 weeks of stuff like this that it's it's quite tragic, it's quite beautiful, definitely good material for Dhamma reflections. Just seeing, it's like I think it was Dee was telling me the day after the fire. She called the library to tell them that a couple of the books that she had checked out didn't survive the fire, and they told her that there's a full-time person working at the library just registering books that didn't, that they got lost in the fire, and that fact is sort of kind of blew my mind. Is the way. It just realizing like this fire affects so many people in so many different ways. Like, who would have ever imagined that you'd need to hire a full-time person at a library just because of a fire? It's like, that's just a library books. And so just all the myriad details of people's lives and how it affects people. And so, kind of just in conclusion, I know this has been a rambling Dhamma talk, but just Lumpur mentioning just the, don't let life just go back to normal, and not obviously not making this a self out of it or issues out of it or pride or whatever we can do with a situation like this. But to me it's like it is contemplating it, it is bringing it up, actually asking people. That was so touching being in town, sort of people asking us, like, well, how did you do? And then just asking the question, well, how did you do? How did it? And then just hearing these stories and giving the people the opportunity to maybe heal by telling their story, or being able to find ways of being of service to them. Just to me, it's like it's allowing it to get a better understanding, bigger picture of the whole event. And kind of the last story was I guess it was about a week ago now that we went over to KPY to rescue the Buddha images that didn't survive and did survive the fire over there. Very tragic. They lost everything at their monastery. It's a Thai monastery on the ridge that they use for retreats every year. And everything, almost probably 80% of the trees, if not more, probably died in all their structures, but one small cabin, were completely destroyed. So just almost the reverse opposite of what happened here. And but I spent a day up there just walking through. Started on our property, but just walking down through all the manzanitas and walking down the trails that the firefighters had cut to get down, and just really trying to just be with the land, let the fire just really see what it had done, and it wasn't until I was up on KPY land, and it was just literally like an hour just sort of walking through just charred trees, and this realization came over me that this is natural. We live in California, and fires is a natural part of the landscape here. I think that due to fire regulations and insurance and just I won't say over, but just the populations, expanding, that we've altered the normal landscape of when fires come through, and we're making them probably larger than they normally would be, and of course creates all sorts of damage to not only human life but the wildlife and the trees and things like that. But this is the environment we are in, and the way that we choose to live as people, that these types of fires, tragic as they are, it is going to be natural. And there was something settling about that. It was like, just for me, it was this really the first time to sort of letting the whole thing in, because before that there had really been this kind of more shock, or not really disbelief, but it was just was unsettling for sure. And but it was the first time I was really kind of at peace with it. It's tragic and wished it hadn't happened, but there was a sense of this is what nature does. And so I'll just hopefully this given people some food for thought for their own ways of thinking about it. I know we all have our own experiences, and but I'll just leave that for our reflection this evening.